Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Podcast, where we empower Iowa women to succeed in work and life. I'm Emily Wood, joined by co-host Ladrina Wilson. Today, we're going to be talking about non-traditional paths for pursuing education. For some, this might look like starting a degree program after they've spent time in the workforce first, or pivoting to a different industry and needing a degree to do that, or maybe earning a degree while they're working. Women often face different life and financial circumstances than men when making these decisions about their education, especially if they're doing it in a non-traditional way. Ladrina, I know you have a lot of degrees under your belt. Will you talk a little bit about your own experience with your education path?
I wasn't anticipating you saying that, but I guess I will humbly own that. I would say that my experience was non-traditional in a couple of ways. I think I went to college, straight out of high school. I was a student athlete, but also I became a mom while I was a student athlete, which is definitely not traditional. And because I had my daughter, which would have been like my junior year, I had to accelerate my degree path. I was a double major, and a lot of people probably would have just dropped out. But the way I work, it was almost like, okay, we got to hurry up and get done because we can't do this with a baby too. So I ended up graduating in 3.5 years with a double major, as opposed to, taking some time off. But it was very strenuous there at the end. And I guess the other way would be non-traditional in that when I pursued my PhD, I was a dean at a college. I had 3 daughters. In fact, my oldest daughter was 10, and she was like, "Now, what are you like? You're in school, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "This looks really hard. Like, I don't think I'm going to do it this way." And I'm like, "You're right. You're onto something." So that's kind of my path. And I don't know if you call it traditional or non-traditional, but that was my experience.
Yeah, I feel like that's something we definitely want to dig into in this conversation is for women, especially that balance of whether it's marriage or kids or whatever it looks like, that having to balance those decisions in life with their education path is really interesting. Because I think, some people, make those plans based on all of those things at the same time. And there's different financial barriers to consider within that for sure.
Yeah. And even the idea that, some people get to just be a student. I've never experienced that. I mean, I did for a little bit, but I've always been balancing it with work or family or something else. And so I just have so much respect for people. Even when I'm in a hiring process, I look to people who have had to juggle multiple responsibilities while also earning good grades. That speaks volumes to their work ethic. And I think we have a couple women who we're going to invite into today's conversations who definitely have those backgrounds and who've shown that tenacity and have applied what they've learned in different ways.
Yes, awesome. So let's bring on our guest. Kayla Kovarna is the marketing director at Baker Group, where she leads strategic marketing and communications that drive business growth and strengthen brand impact. Previously, she served as deputy director at the Des Moines Airport Authority, leading brand initiatives like Fly DSM and Lift DSM while helping secure Amazon Prime air cargo service, Southwest Cargo, and more than 10 new nonstop destinations. So we have her to thank for that. She holds degrees from the University of Iowa and a master's from Wayne State College and is a graduate of the Greater Des Moines Leadership Institute. And she was named a business record 40 under 40 honoring previously.
Well, I can hardly keep up with just all the things, right?
Yeah, that sounds so fancy.
Well, we're also going to bring in Cathy Edwards, who is the CEO of Edwards Creative, a design build company bringing creative vision and executive leadership across the organization. Her path to the helm was anything but conventional, and she's going to share that with us. Early in her career, she worked as a private investigator and assistant coordinator at a residential juvenile center, where she gained experience that sharpened her instinct, deepened her empathy, and gave her a unique lens for understanding people. Today, she channels that perspective into building successful strategies for the business and building business initiatives that advance sustainable growth, innovation, and connects her team, her clients, and communities to various opportunities. Cathy, I hope folks will do the research, but I do want to give you space to just tell us a little bit about what Edwards Creative is, because it's very different than what your educational background is.
Sure. Edwards Creative we're fundamentally a graphic design company. All the work we do is rooted in design, but we do build exhibits for museums, for corporate centers. We have a full fabrication team. And so our work is solely in the creative space.
So you went from private investigator.
Yes. Yes.
With the criminal justice background, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's an interesting path. That is probably a whole nother episode, but I just at least wanted to clarify that before we jump in.
Thank you.
Awesome. So maybe to start off with, if you each want to just tell us a little bit about your education experience and how you kind of thought about the timing for that. And Kayla, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, happy to. So education, like my undergrad, I would say, didn't ever really feel like a decision. At that time, I grew up in a small Northwest Iowa town. And at that time, you either went to college or you became a farmer. And I think my dad would have loved me to become a farmer. That wasn't in the cards for me. And so going to get my undergrad really didn't feel like a decision at the time. It just felt like the path that was ahead. A lot of my peers were going to college. I'm from a big family, but only one of my siblings had gone. So it was just like the next thing. I actually went undeclared, and it wasn't until I was at the University of Iowa that I had even thought of an advanced degree. I grew up in a farming community. A lot of people didn't even go to college. And so an advanced degree just wasn't even in kind of the cards, like never considered it. But definitely by the time I was a junior, senior, I was really interested and was considering, okay, what's my next step? What do I do? And so for me, I was paying for my undergrad. I felt like I couldn't just go straight into a program. And so that's where like the untraditional path started for me. I was like, I need to start my career and also learn what I want to do. And it was interesting because, Emily, you kind of referenced sometimes people pivot and they go back to school. I had a long career in nonprofit development and management. And it wasn't until I went and decided to go get my master's that I pivoted into the communications and marketing space. And so for me, that was a very intentional move, but that's kind of how my education journey started.
Cathy, what about you? What did the timing and decision look like for you?
There really wasn't an option for me. I came from a family of educators. And so when you come from a family of educators, it's pretty much mapped out for you in high school that you're going to go to college, you're going to get a degree, you're going to go into graduate school. That is what we do in our family. And so after high school, I did go straight into an undergrad. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was undeclared as well. I had a sense that it would be criminal justice. But to be quite honest, there was no other decision to be made. I was going to go to college. I was going to stay and get my graduate degree right away, which at that time in the 80s was, I think, unusual. A lot of people did not go for their second degree right away, graduate degree right away after school. So that was an unusual plan, but our parents had instilled that in us. And so that's how it started for me.
Yeah, so I find it interesting that, it feels like it's not a choice. And for some people, and we're in this climate now where people are questioning like the value of education. And so I feel like people are in a different frame of reference right now where they're feeling like, do I even really need to go in some instances? So that's what gets me really jazzed about this conversation so that people can kind of glean what makes sense for them. Cathy, your circumstances were a little bit different. Even though you took a very traditional path, your circumstances definitely, you're welcome to share whatever you think is most pertinent.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your college experience and how it shifted toward a non-traditional student experience?
Sure. About halfway through my sophomore year, I found out I was pregnant. And so in that moment, I was shocked and had to really think about what my future would be, and instantly became that I felt like a burden. And that was to my roommate, to my friends, to everyone, that here was this, pregnant girl in college who had really been living the very traditional college experience. And so I moved out of my roommate's room. I got my own room. I spent the entire semester alone in a very non-traditional manner in terms of just how I was living my life. And really, it was never an option not to go to school and continue my degree. And so I put a plan together while I was at Western alone and made a decision to transfer to a university in my hometown. So I moved back home and went through undergraduate school at St. Ambrose. And then I went to graduate school, but I did not get my degree because I was already working full time. So I did all of the coursework, but back then you had to do the thesis. And for me, that was unsustainable for me at the time. I could have revisited it at any time if I had wanted to continue that. It just wasn't sustainable at the time.
So I hear you saying you're working, you've got a baby, you're paying for school. Similar to Kayla, I see some parallels kind of in your backgrounds.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe each of you could touch on the financial factors a little bit, because I think those decisions are a big piece, especially for women in navigating their decisions around family too, that can weigh in whether they can afford school or not and what that looks like. So would you each mind just sharing a little bit about how the financial factors kind of factored into your decisions?
Sure. For me, I mean, I knew when I was going to Iowa that was going to be a financial burden that I needed to pick up. My parents certainly helped me as much as they could. And I always had a bit of a safety net, but like I was taking out student loans and, you know, after my freshman year, I was working pretty much full time while I was going to school just to pay for rent and things like that, not even related to tuition. And so that, for one, I mean, I look back and part of it was a gift. Like I was really serious about my education because I was paying for it. So I probably skipped a lot less classes than my friends did because I knew like I was footing that bill. But I was in a fortunate position to get some scholarships to help, but I took out some loans. So when I was thinking about going back for my master's, that was definitely a big consideration. I felt I had never had debt before. So I felt that burden of like, okay, I need to make a paycheck. I need to start my career. I know that I have this goal of going to get my master's, but I have time. And so I kind of put that goal on the shelf. And I'm sure we'll talk about timing, but that goal kind of went on the shelf so I could start paying off some of those loans and things. So for me, certainly it was a big part of my decision making.
For me, I needed to take advantage of every resource as a single mom. And so for me, when I started looking at remaining in school, finding myself pregnant as a sophomore, I applied for every grant. And here's the kind of cool thing. If you are a non-traditional student, you do qualify for a lot of programs out there because they want you in the programs. They want you to get a higher education, a degree. And so those resources are out there if you look for them and you're aggressively making that a priority in order to stay in school. And so I remember I was working 2 jobs. I was a single mom. I took advantage of government programs. I took advantage of student loans. I qualified for grants. At the end of the day, those resources I truly believe are there in the community and in the schools, but you really have to, you do your research and you really have to be open to having some flexible options and working your life around it. That was my experience.
Can I ask a follow-up on that, Cathy? Because I know that there are programs, but then there's also like the family dynamic. So I don't want to make it about me by any stretch of the imagination, but I had my daughter in college as well. I had to find an uncle who was kind of like my manny. And unfortunately, I mean, he was unemployed. So he came and lived with me so that I didn't have to worry about childcare. But like I even had situations where my daughter had to come to class with me and I had professors that were flexible. So there's a financial component, but there's also a community component that does intersect with the financial component. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. So it's kind of an interesting story. When I was in my sophomore year, you know how at the end of the year you turn your books in and, you get that cash back. And I don't know that they do it now, but back in the 80s, that's how we did it. And so you'd have all that cash. And as a college student, traditional college student, you go out and you celebrate. Well,
With
one
beers.
of those,
I know we would go to the bar.
one of those community moments, which to me is what you're speaking of, is all the girls on my dorm floor turned in all of their books, and they used that money to throw me a baby shower before I left. And so that was a resource right away. And I think that was the day that I knew I was going to make it, because someone in the community had really put their own needs aside to make sure that I could move forward, transfer to a new college, and have some of those needs that a new mother has, especially in a non-traditional setting. And then my family did help me. I would say that they were babysitters. They were support. They would answer a lot of questions I would have with school, because my parents were educators. So that was great. But in terms of the financial and in terms of the community kind of merging on that, I would say it was the resources of a lot of different groups, a lot of different organizations that stepped in.
I think resources is probably the word that stands out to me. Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. Kayla, I was just wondering, so you talked about like the decision of tabling, getting the master's. So how did you figure out what timing was right then to go back? And then what did it look like at that point in your life different from your undergrad?
Yeah, so timing definitely is important. For me, I, after undergrad, went to Chicago, started my career. Then I got married. Then we decided to start a family. So we moved back to Iowa. And now it's not you just making a decision. And so we're back in Iowa. My husband makes a pretty significant career change. He becomes a firefighter, which is a very non-traditional schedule. And in my head, I kept just saying to myself, like, I'll get my master's when I have more time, when I have more bandwidth. But as you can guess, my bandwidth wasn't going to change. And it was really kind of around the pandemic where I was like navigating being a leader at work, being a mom, being a wife. And I just kind of had this epiphany, like, what am I waiting for? Like, I'm not going to get more bandwidth. I'm going to have to carve out that time. And so I literally remember walking downstairs in my house and saying to my husband, I think I'm going to get my master's. And he just kind of looked at me and was like, okay. And I enrolled the next day. I was like, I can do this. And yeah, it was that goal that was just like here, right? Mm-hmm. I could always see it. I could always feel it. And so it was more of that epiphany moment of like, what am I waiting for? Like, my capacity, my bandwidth, none of that is going to change. Like, what can I shift and move in my day to day? And it was hard. I turned, lunch into a study hall. I turned a softball parking lot or in a gymnastics studio into an office. And, you'd put your kids to bed and then you'd open up your laptop. And that's when you started writing all your papers. And so I don't know, like, ultimately, I think these big goals, they're not achieved all at once. It's kind of like one ordinary Tuesday night at a time. And so that's kind of how I started tackling it. But it was a bit of an epiphany moment of, what am I waiting for? I can do this.
Yeah, I hear how you carve out time is where I hear you say that. Or sometimes I'll hear people say the phrase make time. And I'm like, well, time like exists. Yeah. Like it already exists. You're not making it, right? But you are prioritizing. And Kayla, what I hear in your story is a lot of like adjustments that you made. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to hear from the both of you, especially to, when you're thinking about that woman who might be wanting to make the leap. Yeah. What adjustments, like what would you either have done differently, or what adjustments did the people around you have to make in order to make things happen? Was it your partner? Did your kids have to take on different response? What did that look like for you, Kayla? And then maybe we could shift back over to Cathy.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of like guilt-ridden nights, if I'm honest, of like, nights where my husband was like handling dinner and doing the laundry and doing all the transportation for the kids so I could focus on school, and times where he would be on shift and he's gone for 24 hours at a time, where I had to like call in a lot of favors, like, hey, can you pick up this daughter at this place and drop off this child at this place? So, I mean, I'm still learning this lesson, but like learning to ask for help. It's not a strength of mine. I'm working on it. But I think asking for help and being okay with help can make all of this manageable. But that's a big hurdle. Like if you are somebody like me who's kind of independent, goal oriented, you're like, I've got it. But when you take on like a big goal like this, to invest in yourself, you do have to ask for some help. And so if that's family, if that's friends, wherever you can pull those community resources, I think that can make it all manageable. But I didn't start asking for help right away. And it wasn't until like my head started dipping underwater that I was like, hold up, I need some help here.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I think there's so many people that need permission to just ask. And if you are a force, which both of you are, I know that, people think you're okay when even sometimes you're not, right? And so like proactively putting that request out there. Cathy, tell us a little bit about what your day-to-day looked like. What did it look like when you had to make adjustments, or who was involved in those adjustments?
Well, it was the 80s, right? And so it was difficult in terms of having resources, because being a single mom in the 80s made you something of an outcast in some communities. And so you really had to find those resources. It was a lot more challenging to find your allies during that time. And so when I speak to women about it now who ask me about it, I'm like, you need to find your allies. You need to find those resources, those ride or die that'll come in and help you when you don't have someone with you. But my days then, I had, because I knew my time was so precious, I got an apartment right next to the college that I transferred to. And every morning, my son and I would put our backpacks on and we walked to the university. And there was a childcare center on campus, which I think if more higher education facilities realize that, they would understand what a benefit that is. And so we would put our backpacks on, we go to school every day. And the benefit of that too was I was able to do my work all day. So I would go to class. My son was safely at daycare on campus, and then I would do all my homework. And then by the time my day was over, we'd go home, then I could go to work. And so my day to day was a lot of prioritizing the future over the present, missing time with my son in order to really reach those goals that seemed so far, but still there was no other option. I had to do it.
And you just mentioned there, that resource of the child care center. I'm curious from both of you, what other resources do you think that either education systems, or maybe if people are working, their employers should be putting out there to support women specifically as they're pursuing their education paths?
Well, I think the accelerated degree programs are very important. I think anytime that a woman or anyone can take advantage of an accelerated program that helps them move the needle and achieve that goal and be able to move on to other things in their life. To me, that's probably one of the most important things.
Yeah, I would add, going to an in-person program wasn't even an option for me because of my husband's kind of untraditional schedule. And so I think that the idea of having childcare on campus, I mean, if that was a resource that I was aware of, that would have been my preference. But I was so grateful that online learning has progressed as far as it has, because that really opened up an opportunity for me. I think flexibility in what those programs look like in the coursework. For me, I knew I couldn't complete it in 2 years. I would just be taking on too much. And so I actually reached out to my advisor and said, okay, can I stretch this 3 years? Is that acceptable? And if I did, what did that look like? And so I had to kind of map that out, because not every course you need is offered every semester. And so I had to really be intentional about course mapping. So I think some more resources around that too. But I love the idea of on-site childcare. I think that's huge. Employer support for sure. But even just the more flexible and adaptable we can make those programs to make it either accelerate it or prolong it to let somebody fit that into their lives. Because as we were saying, we can't make more time. So how do we make it fit within the time we have? I think that would be really valuable to any woman or anyone who is trying to go back to school.
I also think when you get back to talking about the financial barriers, I think if there are really informed people available to talk about the financial aid process and the grant process, I feel like it's a complex, convoluted system, and I think it's intimidating, and I think people believe before they even start that they can't afford to go, or that the process is so overwhelming and so intimidating that maybe they don't even want to jump into the opportunity of going back to school or going to school, period. And so I think when higher education has very informed and accessible people to work them through the process, I think that makes a big difference too.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point. As some folks may know, I served as a vice president for student services. And before that, I was a dean of students. I supervised the financial aid, the people who supervised the financial aid department. And I would get letters back that were financial aid letters. And I'd be reading them like, I don't even know what this is saying. Like, I know what I need to look for, but like everything before that and after that, I'm like, I don't know what all of that means, but this means this, right? And I was in the field. So, and I can't tell you the number of people who were like, I can't afford it before they even knew what the cost was, before they knew what the options were. So there is this kind of mental block that people have. So I appreciate you guys bringing that up. I wanted to expound upon one area that you all kind of hinted at and referenced. You talked about employer support. Practically, I mean, Cathy, you're a CEO, you're an employer, and then Kayla, you're in a leadership position. Like, what does employer support look like to you for someone who wants to pursue their education?
To me, as a executive leader in my organization, it means that we have to give them space to have flexible schedules, which is very challenging. You know, educators, the coursework, they do have evening classes, they do have, online learning, but at the same time, our team members still have to be able to fit all of that into their day and be productive at work. So to me, we have to be open to making their schedules more flexible, maybe some training, some financial aid training. Maybe someone comes into our organization, talks about those opportunities at community colleges or local colleges, and informs them on their opportunities to grow within the organization through higher education.
Yeah, I agree with all of those things, Cathy. I also think that for me, a big benefit was that where I was at the time I started my master's, they did have tuition assistance. And so that was a big piece. When I left, I work at Baker Group, and they also really value continuing education. I'm currently in an advanced leadership program that they host, and it's a year-long program. So the culture here is very supportive. So I think financial support is huge, especially, talking about those barriers, like, is this even possible? Can I make this work? So that part is huge. And then I think creating that space, having a culture where people understand that you are a whole person outside of just your daily work life. And I'm fortunate that Baker Group certainly has that and encourages this continuing education. And I mean, there were so many people that I didn't even know they knew I was in a master's program that were like, how's it going? Like, how are you doing? Like, how's your thesis? All those different things. And so feeling that support, especially when you're in an online program, when you don't have classmates, it was huge. So both that financial aspect and then just knowing that I was supported and it wasn't like a burden or something like, oh, that's taking away her focus from here. Knowing that they had my back was big.
I think one thing that I experienced when deciding to get my master's is I learned that there were a lot fewer scholarships for advanced degrees than there are for undergrad degrees. So I think that's something that, maybe it would be an interesting thing to work on, especially if you're pursuing it in a non-traditional path, because I think a lot of times grad programs are supposed to be funded by being a grad assistant or having some role on campus. But if you're doing it in a non-traditional path, that's not always the case. So there's interesting, resources that I think could be looked at there. I'd love to know from both of you, what were some of the fears and doubts that you had to overcome during your educational journey?
The visceral response, like both of you are like moving in your chairs, just like, oh.
I mean, for me, ultimately, like on repeat, can I do this? Can I do this? Like, am I taking too much time away from my family? Am I, you scale back. I scaled back my volunteerism. I scaled back like my social time, less date nights, all those different things. You're just like, you're in that moment and you're like, oh, I have to write this, 12-page paper. It's already like 10 o'clock at night. Can I do this? That self-doubt kind of creeps in. And so just like creating that mantra of like, I can do this. I can do hard things, like I've got this, and just putting that on repeat was huge. But there were a lot of days of guilt and doubt and all those different components. And I think it's just, how do I get through this next assignment? Like, how do I just keep moving forward?
Well, for me, interestingly, what I wasn't afraid of was that this was for nothing. I knew getting my education was going to make a huge impact on the rest of my life and my son's life. And so I wasn't afraid of staying the course and doing the work because I knew it was the right move for me. What I was afraid of, not only the obvious failure that I wouldn't be able to do that work, but that during the process, my professors would give up on me because I couldn't be at class because my son was sick, or my peers had to change their schedule because I couldn't meet the group class time, right? And so I always had this fear that others would give up on how hard it had to be to work with me because my situation was different. So people had to be flexible with me, and I was always afraid that they were going to give up because it was hard to work with me through the process. I'd also say that time, I was afraid I wasn't giving my family enough time. I was afraid I wasn't dedicating enough time to actually learn the material and not just get through the process so that I had this piece of paper at the end, because what was the point of that? And of course, money. Money's always that thing that you feel like if you don't have enough of. There's this, bubbling fear all the time when you're in school that you're not going to be able to pay for the next year. And so that was probably another really big one for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to kind of wrap things, because we're talking about, things that you were saying to yourself, that internal mantra, can I do this? Can I afford this? How am I going to make the, am I a burden to folks? Which a lot of women who aren't even in school carry that narrative. Mm-hmm. And through this process, it sounds like you were able to shift from, can I do this, to I can do this. Mm-hmm. Yes. But it took recognizing that there are going to be some guilty nights. There are going to be some sacrifices, both in your time, the prior commitments that you've had, how you've shown up for your family. And there's going to be people around you that will rally if you ask for help, whether it's your roommates, if you're a non-traditional on-campus student, your colleagues, your supportive employer, if you have that, your family, right? And I hear you all also saying that having that focus on what like the end game is, not doing what's easy for the right now self, but really focusing on the future self, which I think is really hard for women to do when we have so many obligations in our personal lives and in our professional lives, especially as leaders. My biggest takeaway from this, and it is kind of reinvigorated in our conversation because I know this to be true for myself. If it was easy, everybody would do it. Right? So true. You're exceptional and you're fantastic at what you do because you decided to continue to persevere and do the hard thing. Mm-hmm. And so often it's not about like academically, can you do it? it's all these other factors, including financial, that create these barriers. I'm so encouraged by what you all have shared today. I hope that our listeners are as well. And I hope that even if we can just get one person across the finish line to get her closer to that goal or financial freedom that may be on the other side of that degree, I hope we can see that happen. Until then, I hope that our listeners will continue to be bold, be brilliant, and be fearless.